Shalakaya Yakshuramilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Shri Mate Bhaktivedanta Swamine Tinamine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatharine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So the first 27 chapters of 27 verses of the first chapter were like a, if you remember, they were like a mini Mahabharata, right? And we hear about the armies are lined up on the battlefield, and let me just get my notes here. And Dhritarashtra is asking Sanjaya, what did my sons and the sons of the Pandavas, sons of Pandu, do? And Krishna drives a chariot in front of Bhishma, Drona, Pramukata, right? In the front of the face of Bhishma and Drona. And Arjuna becomes, pretty upset, seeing that he has to fight his grandfather and his guru. Not an easy situation to do. And there's a discussion. There was some Raj Niti going on. Who, if you remember, who should Duryodhana mention first? And he says Bhavan Bhishmas. Says first. He mentions Dronacharya because he's a Brahmana, and Bhishma, who's a Kshatriya. And we see that everyone seems like they're just about to start getting ready to fight, and and Prabhupada mentions that why does he want to pull the chariot in front of to see who he can fight with? And Krishna says, okay, so he does that, and then he says, just see all the crews assembled here. And then he becomes overwhelmed with compassion, and he starts to speak. And that starts on verse 28. So Arjuna then starts expressing his doubts, and that's definitely something you need to know for the test, are the different, the 5 different reasons that Arjuna gives for not fighting. And one is compassion, right? One is fear of sinful reactions. One is happiness, and that he won't be able to enjoy. And then the last one is the 5th one is indecision. Oh, and then the 4th one is the destruction of family. Adharma bibhavat Krishna pradushanti kulastriya, verse 41. And so, he's saying, Krishna, you're the maintainer of all people. Why are you asking this? He just can't understand why he should have to fight this battle. And then he, at the last verse of the first chapter, Sanjaya tells Dhritarashtra that Arjuna has put down his bow and arrow. He sat down on the chariot, and he's overwhelmed. So, any questions on the first chapter?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. 5 reasons, can you repeat, please?
Pardon me?
5 reasons. Arjuna told 5 reasons for not fighting: compassion, destruction of family. Can you?
compassion, destruction of family, fear of sinful reactions, enjoyment, and then in the next chapter, indecision. Is that okay?
Thank you, Prabhu.
Yeah. So the first four are mentioned in the first chapter. The last one is mentioned in the second chapter. So he was compassionate that, why should, I'm going to have to kill, these people who are, my relatives. Enjoyment was that, when you win something and you have a whole kingdom, you want to show it off, you want to enjoy, and all the people you'd want to enjoy with are going to be dead. And fear of sinful reactions that, even though, why should I, if I have greater knowledge, why should I engage in this and kill my guru and my grandfather? It's sinful. And that if all the Kshatriyas are killed in the battle, then the women will be unprotected. There will be Varna Sankara. There'll be, the Kshatriyas are the one that keeps society in check and going towards a spiritual goal. And if they are not present, if they're killed on the battlefield, then what's going to happen to society? And then the last one, in the second chapter, Krishna says, in verse 6, nor do we know which is better, conquering them or being conquered by them. So indecision. Okay. Other questions, comments? Okay, so then the second chapter, there's more about doubts in the first 10 verses of the second chapter. And Krishna is saying, kutas tvam kashmalamidam, how have these impurities come upon you? Do not yield to this degrading impotence, he says. And then Arjuna says, how can I kill my grandfather and my guru? I should be worshiping them. Better that I live like a beggar than kill these people. And now I'm really indecisive. And then verse 7 is a very important verse to know, that then Arjuna actually surrenders. Karpanya doso pahata swabhava, he says that I'm confused about my duty. I've lost my composure. I'm asking you to tell me what I should do. Then the next verse, I can't get rid of this pain. And then he tells Krishna, I shall not fight. And then Krishna smiles. And then verse 11 to 30, that's the first section, more about Krishna's doubts. And then from 11 up till 30, we hear Gyan, the difference between the body and the soul, not directly bhakti at this time, but knowledge. And Krishna immediately chastises them, asochan amato chastvam pragyavaram shabasa, say that you're speaking learned, but it's all foolish. And that the soul is eternal, and that the body goes through so many different changes, but the soul remains the same. And that therefore, if we understand we're not that body, we should tolerate pain and pleasure. And real vision is that which is eternal is real, and that which is temporary is false. And then Krishna goes into a description about the soul being immutable, and you can't destroy the soul. Even all the great weapons that Arjuna has, the fire weapon, the water weapon, that, they can't touch the soul. And therefore, the eternality of the soul is so important. And never was there a time when you did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings. And you remain a person in the future, right? And then, more about then that beautiful verse in 22, where Krishna says, when you just as a person gives up old garments and gets new ones, so similarly the soul accepts new material bodies. And then more about the soul being uncuttable and, unbreakable. You can't wet it by water, etc. And then in 26, an interesting one, that even if you think you're your body, even if you think the soul is always born and dies forever, then there's still no reason not to fight. Because one who is born, death is certain. And after death, one is certain to take birth again. Therefore, you should do your duty. And then 29, if you remember, that was the amazing verse. Some look on the soul as amazing. Some describe him as amazing, and some hear of him as amazing, while others, even after hearing about him, cannot understand him at all. So any questions on the first two sections of the second chapter?
Prabhuji, can we say that whatever Lord Krishna is talking at this point in time is contextual, in the sense that one generally will not make such kind of arguments otherwise, right? This is a unique situation.
In what way? This difference between the body and the soul is
Yes.
contextual?
Yeah.
I think it's pretty basic philosophy. Because it's taking place on a battlefield. Is that why you're?
Yes, because otherwise in real life, generally we would not make these arguments, right? Other than accepting death, accepting birth as a fact of life. This unavoidable duty that Arjuna has to perform as a Kshatriya. So can we say that this philosophy is more contextual for the fact that Arjuna is a Kshatriya, and as a Kshatriya he is refusing to fight?
Well, there's a few places that it's contextual when he says, stand and fight.
Mm-hmm.
And considering your specific duty as a Kshatriya, that's another verse. But in general, this is just human philosophy. This is just standard philosophy, that there's a difference between the body and the soul.
Mm-hmm.
The soul is eternal, the body is temporary. We put so much effort into taking care of the body, but we polish the bird cage, but we don't feed the bird. So this is pretty standard, basic, super important philosophy. But like in verse 31, in the next section, that's more contextual. He says, considering your specific duty as a Kshatriya, you should know there is no better engagement for you than fighting on religious principles. So there's no need for hesitation.
Mm-hmm. Prabhuji, we cannot hear you. No.
How about now?
Yes.
Yeah. So verses 31 to 38 is somewhat contextual, because yes, he's talking to him as a Kshatriya. And in one sense, you could say any conversation is somewhat contextual, but there's a lot here that is just philosophy, and philosophy transcends the contextual to a large extent. This applies to anyone. It's not really contextual that for the soul there is never birth nor death, right? That's for everybody.
Right.
He does not come into being, right? He's unborn, eternal, ever existing and primeval. He's not slain when the body is slain. Now you could say slain when the body is slain. The word slain is there because it's happening on a battlefield. But still the principle is that when the body dies, we don't die.
Mm-hmm. I think what I was alluding to is that if you look at verse 30, where the Lord says, therefore you need not grieve for any living entity. Sometimes your arguments have to be a little bit more pushy to wake that person up. so to speak. So otherwise, generally, we would not use such statements, I suppose.
Well, like if you're, if a close friend's parents passed away in a car accident or something like that,
Right.
then it's just like in the so then you might say, therefore there's no need to grieve. You could tell the people, well, the soul is still alive. The body is now. You might not say that right away. Usually there is some grieving time.
Mm-hmm.
Even Krishna allowed for the widows in the battle after the battle of Kurukshetra to have some grieving time before he spoke philosophy.
Mm.
But here he's making a principle that you're right. So, but it's both. It's happening on a battlefield, but this is definitely something that we would want to, at the right time, in the right place, in the right circumstance, tell someone that your parents aren't dead. They're living somewhere else in a different reality.
Right.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Other questions, comments on these first 30 verses? So then the next section, which I believe is up to from 31 to 38, is, as we've already mentioned, it's if you think you're your body, if you think you're a Kshatriya, you should still fight. And that's where, Krishna says all these things, Kshatriya's duty is to fight for religious principles, and Kshatriyas are happy to have a religious fight. And a Kshatriya is concerned about their reputation, and people speak ill of you, Arjuna. So he's kind of, okay, if you think you're a Kshatriya, you think you're a body, you should still fight. And just giving some kind of Kshatriya dharma. Either you die on the battlefield and you attain heaven, or you enjoy the earthly kingdom. So you win-win. Either way, you're in good luck. You're in good shape. So that's up to 38. And then we hear about Buddha Yoga or Nishkam Karma Yoga from 39 to 53. And verse 40, as we mentioned before, very, very important verse. There's no loss. So even a person gives a small donation or says they like the Harinam party or visits a temple once, they make great benefit. And then 41 is perhaps, in one sense, the most important verse in the Gita, because Prabhupada said when he read chapter 2, verse 41, that's what gave him the impetus to start ISKCON. So then Krishna is encouraging Arjuna to do his duty. 47 is a very famous verse. Maybe many people in India have this verse, at least the first line, memorized. Karma nevari karaste. You have the right to perform your prescribed day, but they don't usually quote the second line, mafaleshu kadachana, but don't be attached to the fruits. So perform your duty in a detached way. 49, also an important verse. Keep all abominable activities far distanced by Buddha Yoga, by devotional service. And that bhakti in 50 transcends the modes of nature, because a man engaged in devotional service rids himself of both good and bad, good karma, bad karma. And then an example is given in 51. And so this section here is Krishna's explaining that one should work with knowledge. So you're acting, not that you go off into the forest, but you act, but in knowledge. And then from 54 to the end of the chapter you could say it's about being, some of it is about being stita prajna, being fixed. in Krishna consciousness, and working in Bhakti Yoga, you get material detachment, and you come to the platform of liberation. So then, because Arjuna asked this question, well, what are the symptoms of a fixed person? How does he walk? How does he speak, etc.? And a lot of what Krishna is arguing here is about the person is free from the desire for sense gratification. They're not disturbed. They can withdraw their senses from sense objects like a tortoise does. And that you really need, 59 is such an important verse for all devotees, that we really need a higher taste in order to give up the lower taste. Because the senses in 60 are really difficult. They're really strong. And then 62 and 63 are famous verses, Dhyato Visaya Pungsang Sangaste Shubhajayate, etc. That when you the step-by-step process of falling down into material consciousness, contemplating the object of the senses, developing attachment, leads to lust, lust leads to anger, anger to delusion, delusion to bewilderment of memory, bewildered memory to loss of intelligence, and loss of intelligence one falls down. So then Krishna says, but there's another way to do it. Just be satisfied in Krishna consciousness, be free from attachment, be free from aversion, control your senses. But the senses are not easy to control. In 67, as a boat on the water is swept away by a strong wind, even one of the roaming senses can carry a mind's intelligence away from his or her fixed intelligence. And a beautiful verse in 69, what's night for the conditioned soul is day for the devotee. What's night for the devotee is day for the conditioned soul. Just this whole different outlook on the world. So we will have disturbances, but we should not be disturbed, just like the incessant flow of desire. Let them enter like rivers into the ocean. The ocean is not disturbed. So are there any questions, comments on chapter 2? Or these last parts of chapter 2?
Prabhuji, I have a question on 52.
52. Okay, well, let me find it real quick then. Whoops, my computer just... Okay, go ahead. What's your question?
When Lord Krishna says, you shall become indifferent to all that has been heard and all that is to be heard, what is he alluding to here?
He's
recollect.
alluding 52. He's alluding to the Vedas, the Karma Kanda section of the Vedas.
Okay.
Okay. Yep, the Karma Kanda section of the Vedas. So yeah, you're not gonna any more want to try to enjoy this world through the Vedic processes. You're going to want to perform, something more advanced than that. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Prabhu.
Other questions, comments on the second chapter? Okay, chapter 3. So this is called Karma Yoga. And the connection between chapter 2 and chapter 3 is that, Krishna told Arjuna to keep all abominable activities far away by devotional service or Buddhi Yoga. And so if we take the meaning of Buddhi as intelligence, Krishna's order to Arjuna meant that, by using his intelligence, he should avoid bad activities, right? So chapter 3 begins with Arjuna requesting Krishna to clarify what seems to be contradictory instructions. Because if you use your intelligence and you avoid abominable activities, that means you shouldn't fight. But you're telling me to fight. So what's going on? And that's why he says, Krishna, why do you want me to engage in this ghastly warfare? If you think intelligence, because he thinks intelligence means sitting around and not doing anything, is better than fruit of work. Equivocal means two kinds. So I'm bewildered by your equivocal instructions. So tell me which one I should do. And this is, so that's a short section, you could say, that what should I do, renunciation or work? And then now from verse 3 to verse 9 is about Nishkam Karma Yoga, or combining knowledge with detachment. And that's, so Krishna says that I've already explained there's two classes of people who try. One to understand God, one is by the Gyan, and one is by Bhakti. And so he says that don't think that you're just walking away from the battlefield, abstaining from work, you get freedom from karma. You can still get karma. You're walking around the forest, you're stepping on ants, there's karma. And how the modes of material nature, control everyone. That's in verse 5. And I really like this, at this point, that it's so clear even today with bogus yogis and things like that, that one who restrains the senses of action, but whose mind is always dwelling on sense and objects, deludes himself and is called a pretender. And then he compares it to but a sincere person is far superior. And then he says, do your duty, perform your work, and ultimately do it as a offering to Vishnu. Work done as a sacrifice for Vishnu or Krishna has to be performed. Otherwise, work causes bondage in the material world. Okay, so that was the second section, 3 to 9. Now from 10 to 16, we go starting with karma kanda, materialist activities, to karma yoga, or activities to serve Krishna. So verse 10 talks about demigod worship, and it makes the one happy and prosperous. And the demigod, so this is all karma kanda. The demigod, 11 is about you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. The demigods being pleased by sacrifice will also please you. And thus, by cooperation between men and demigods, prosperity will reign for all. And then that if you accept the gifts from God, you should not be a thief, but you should offer them back. Well, here it says, in charge of the various necessities of life, the demigods, being satisfied by the performance of yagna, sacrifice, will supply all necessities to you. But he who enjoys such gifts without offering them to the demigods in return is certainly a thief. So that's the karma kanda part of it. But then the next verse brings it up to yoga, bhakti yoga, where it says, devotees only take prasadam. Right? And if you don't eat prasadam, you're in big trouble because you're eating karma. And then the process for performing yagyas are mentioned in 14 and 15. And then in 16, one who does not follow the human form of life, this cycle of sacrifice as established by the Vedas, leads a life full of sin. So they just engage in sense gratification. So then from 17 to 35, we learn about how important it is to set a good example and other things. So it talks about one who seeks pleasure in himself in 17 and 18. and then acting without attachment to the fruits of actions. And then an example is given of Janaka Maharaj in verse 20. And then 21 is a very important verse. Whatever action, yad yad acharati shestas tatareve tarojana. Sayap parmana kurute lokas tadanuvartate. That whatever a great person does, common men follow. Whatever standards they accept by their example, all the world pursues. And then Krishna talks about himself. I don't need to do anything. I'm God. I have everything. But still, I do my duties to set the example. Right? If I didn't set that example, there'd be big problems in the world in 24. And so we should do it in the right consciousness that, in ignorant people, they do their duties with attachment. But the learned, we know better. We should act, but for leading people on the right path. So again, by setting a good example. We don't necessarily tell them in 26, stop everything, move into the temple, become a brahmachari, right? So as not to disturb the minds of ignorant men attached to the fruitive results of prescribed duties, a learned person should not induce them to stop work. Rather, by working in the spirit of devotion, he should engage them in all sorts of activities. So we show people the art of work. You don't have to give it up. Stay in your position, but continue working and serve Krishna. Then 27, a very important verse, the spirit soul, bewildered by their false ego, thinks themselves the doer, whereas the modes of material nature are actually acting. So this idea that, who's the doer? Who takes responsibility for their actions? Well, we do. Even though we can't do anything without God's sanction, still we get because of our desire, we need to be careful. And then a few verses about the power of the three modes of material nature to cover us. And therefore, the only way to give out is mentioned in verse 30, that surrender, become Krishna conscious. And we should follow in verse 32, but if you're envious of Krishna or envious of your spiritual master, then you tend to disregard their instructions. And then something about doing prescribed duties. Better to do one's own duty that's been given to us by Krishna than someone else's. So any questions, comments, thoughts on those verses? Okay. So then the next section, which is the last section, is about how important it is to be beware of the challenges of lust and anger. Because Arjuna asked this great question, that what is one impelled to do the wrong thing, even unwillingly, as if like forced? And Krishna says, Kama Esha Krodha Esha Rajaguna Samudbhava. It's lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contract with the mode of passion and later transformed into wrath, which is all devouring sinful enemy of this world. And then he gives the different levels of the covering that, fire covered by smoke, the smoke is a little pain in the neck, but you can still get benefit from the heat of the fire. The mirror covered by dust. Well, you can't see yourself in the mirror, but at least you can see the mirror. But the next one, embryo covered by the womb, that's very deep covering. You don't see the child until they come out of the womb. So this lust is a great enemy, and lust sits in the senses, in the mind, and the intelligence. And we should regulate our senses. It's possible to control by regulating the senses, and and therefore destroying this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. And then a little point, 2 verses about the different levels. So the working senses are superior to dull matter. Mind is higher than the senses. Intelligence is still higher than the mind, and the soul is even higher than intelligence. So knowing yourself to be transcendental to the material senses, mind, and intelligence, O mighty armed Arjuna, one should steady the mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence, Krishna consciousness, and thus by spiritual strength conquer this insatiable enemy known as lust. So questions, comments?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam. Bhopalaka
Yes,
Prabhu.
Prabhu.
Prabhuji, we have learned that the mind should be dictated by the intelligence by the Supreme Lord.
Yep.
Also, also we've come under situations where the mind is also dominated by the senses. So when the senses are overpowering the mind, how do we approach the intelligence at that moment? How can we actually take shelter of the intelligence? So what is the instant moment or anything we can instantly think of so that we can
Well,
overcome?
we can pick up our beads. That's one thing we can do, right? And just take shelter of Krishna's name. We can also just get whatever it is, whatever the environment is, get out of it. Just go somewhere else. Changing the environment can really change things. So, go for a walk, or, go to the temple or whatever. And then just it is an overall thing, which we'll learn about, which we've spoken about at some length, is to really have that faith that we are not our mind, and that our mind is dictating so many things. What's that?
So I come to understanding that whichever atmosphere you are there, where the senses are dominating you, you come out of the atmosphere and enter into some other better atmosphere where the mind focuses on the intelligence. That one.
Yeah. So changing the atmosphere. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it's a lot easier to change the environment than change ourselves. But by being in a different environment, then we automatically change. Just like, you're in bed, and you just, your alarm went off, you want to sleep another hour. And if you stay in bed, you're probably, and you don't really need the extra rest. But if you get out of bed, pick up your beads, go for a walk, or take a bath, and of course, everything. And you just do that, even though your mind doesn't want to. The mind is saying, no, come on, sleep, sleep, sleep. Or, go on the internet and see what's happening in Hindustan Times or whatever. But you don't listen to that. You just go, you take your shower, you get out, you go for a walk with your bead bag, and there you are. Now you're probably doing pretty well.
I also have another question, Prabhuji, closely related to this. We have been told that japa walk is not favorable. Then you sit in a place and do the japa. So sometimes when we sit in a place, the mind is heavily pondering. It ponders over so many things. So can we take a walk, or a slow walk, or a fast walk, which is recommended?
You're right. It's often recommended that we sit like a yogi would. You see the picture of Prabhupada pacing back and forth in Los Angeles and chanting his rounds while he's walking. The principle is to be focused on hearing the holy name. So if you're worrying about traffic, or you're really staring at all the beauty around you, that can stop us from always remembering Krishna while we're chanting. So it's maybe somewhat of an individual thing, but some people, they have to walk because they're falling asleep. Right? So, but the traditional thing is that you sit straight, back straight, hand hand in your bead bag, next to your chest, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. That's the traditional way to chant japa. But Prabhupada also went on japa walks sometimes, so it's not the end of the world. But the idea is to hear the holy name and focus. And you know, you have to be careful if you're in a major city and you try to focus too much, you may get hit by a car or something. So just,
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Dandavat pranam.
okay.
Dandavat
Yes.
pranam. Hare Krishna.
Okay. I'm just going to go off video for a minute. What else?
So Prabhuji, since this chapter is titled Karma Yoga, the verses talking about Karma Yoga are all the verses related to Nishkama Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga.
I think I lost the internet for a minute there.
Yes, in case you were speaking, we did not hear you.
No, I didn't hear your question. You said,
Oh, I was just
chapter is called-
asking, yeah, since this chapter is titled Karma Yoga, so all the verses specifically referencing Nishkama Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga are the ones that relate to the title of the chapter?
yeah, it's not that every verse is about karma yoga. Yeah, as we said, some of them are karma kanda, right?
Yes, that's what
But
I was saying.
that's-
So only the
yeah.
verses where the Lord is, there is a preponderance of focus on Nishkama Karma Yoga, and then towards the end, Bhakti Yoga. Those are, I mean, in between there are some verses on
Yes.
Bhakti Yoga.
Yeah, that's a fair statement. Yes.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay, then let us go on to chapter 4. So this is chapter 3 discussed how lust covers knowledge, and ignorance binds us to our attachments. And Krishna recommended, right, doing dutiful, detached work to attain transcendental knowledge. So now the next chapter is about transcendental knowledge. And Krishna says that he instructed this knowledge many years ago to Ikshvaku and to Vivishwan, and that it comes in Parampara, verse number 2. So the first 10 verses are about transcendental knowledge about Krishna. And then this beautiful verse is, how do you understand Krishna? By being his friend and his devotee. Bhaktosi me sakha cheti, he says. Then Arjuna has this doubt that, wait a second, Vivishwan is senior to you. How could you have instructed him? And Krishna says, no, don't worry about that. Many births you and I have, all of us have passed. I can remember them, you can't. And then he talks about, how he chooses to come, that when there's a discrepancy in religious principles, he descends and he delivers the pious, annihilates the miscretants, and reestablishes the principles of religion. And then a very famous verse, Krishna says, one who understands, one who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities, Janma Karma Chame Divyam, goes back to the spiritual world. And 10 is also a beautiful verse, that when you're freed from this attachment, fear, anger, when you're absorbed in Krishna, you become purified by knowledge of him, and then you attain transcendental love for him. So nice step-by-step process. And then another very famous verse that as you surrender, yeyatamam prapadyante, Krishna reciprocates. Everyone follows Krishna in all respects, some directly, some indirectly. Okay, so the next set of verses is just 11 to 15, and it's about applying transcendental knowledge. So I always thought this was interesting that, in 12, people who worship the demigods, they get pretty quick results. Krishna doesn't, even for material things, doesn't necessarily give quick results because he wants to extract some purification. And then the Varnashram is spoken about for the first time in verse 13, that according to the modes of material nature, there's 4 divisions of human society. And although Krishna says, I created the system, I'm not part of the system. You may think I'm a Kshatriya, you may think I'm a Vaishya in Vrindavan, but I'm, not part of this system in this world. And then we hear about how no work binds Krishna, binds the Lord. He's aloof. Okay, so that's that section. Any thoughts, questions on the first 2 sections, transcendental knowledge 1 to 10 and applying transcendental knowledge 11 to 15?
So, Prabhu, the connection between 11 and 12, which is as all surrender unto me, and then the next verse talks about demigod worship. Is that also transcendental knowledge? Demigod worship?
No, 11 is.
11 is.
Well, yeah, but he doesn't emphasize transcendental knowledge. See, 11 is also talking about demigod worship, but it's talking about all kinds, that however you approach, you get what you want. And it also some of the commentators talk about, if somebody wants Brahman, they get Brahman. But if someone wants bhakti, Krishna gives them bhakti. Well, it's transcendental knowledge. That's true. That demigods worship. You can get a quick result, but it's not the recommendation.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, I have a question.
Yes.
As in the text 11 and 12, you mentioned Krishna gives us for the desire of his devotees, but what if the desire is supersede ask for his or her need, or maybe sometimes due to according to our karma, according to our positions, Krishna rewards us, but isn't it something different, whatever we want or desire, Krishna is fulfilling?
No, we don't. It would be a real problem if Krishna fulfilled all our desires, right? First of all, everyone would be a Korpati.
Yeah, but
so you have to deserve, then desire. You have to have the right karma.
deserve, yeah, got it. I was thinking, as all surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly.
Yeah, but that means that's not about money. That's like if you want bhakti, you get bhakti. If you want mayavad, you get mayavad. If you want material desires, you get repeated birth and death. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Probably in Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur goes to some lengths to describe this point. But yes, Krishna's reciprocating with everyone. And I always thought it was interesting. He says, Mama Manovartante, that everyone followed. It's like that time, I think I mentioned this in the class, that time Prabhupada was asked, how many followers do you have? And he said, unlimited. Some know it and some don't. Because he was making the point from this verse 11 that everyone follows Krishna's path in all respects. Either Krishna's Maya or Krishna himself?
Another question, Prabhuji, like as we know, whatever sacrifices we do, like yagna, and the final ahuti or final one goes to Narayan or Krishna. And in that way, whatever we have desire, even a material desire, we go reach to demigods. In most of the cases, right? Unless until not in a pure bhakti mode. So is that anyway also Krishna fulfills that through those demigods?
Yes, if they have the karma,
Okay, but
if they deserve
final
it.
thanks. Okay,
But the
sanction
demigods
is
get everything from Krishna. So why not go to
got it.
the root?
Mhm.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
All right. So the next section is practicing. So practicing karma, but being a jnani. So being detached and doing one's duty. And this is 16 to 24. So this whole thing about action in inaction and inaction in action, right? So when you're busy doing things, that's action, and you may get depending on what you're doing, you may get some karma for that. But if you're busy doing things and doing it for Krishna, there's no karma. But if you're inactive, if action in inaction, so when you're acting, there's inaction, means no karma, no reaction when you're doing it for Krishna. And for the non-devotee, they are doing action and they're getting reactions. Okay, so going up to 24. Oh, okay. So this whole point about, like in 20, abandoning all attachment to the results of his activities, that's nishkam karma, right? No, ever satisfied and independent, he performs no fruitive work, and that means karma, although engaged in all kinds of undertakings. So he's busy doing stuff, but he's not getting any karma. And this was very different than what Arjuna was originally thinking. To be free from karma, you have to go into the forest, meditate. But no, here it's saying be busy in the biggest cities in the world and fight for Krishna, do service for Krishna, and then there's no problems. And to be satisfied, just be, 22, he's satisfied with gain, which comes of his own accord, free from duality and does not envy, steady, not entangled. And so they're above the modes of material nature. And so their activities are transcendental. That's verse 23. And then 24 is, again, the idea of using everything in Krishna's service. So then 25 to 33 is how sacrifices lead to transcendental knowledge. And we read these earlier. They're different Vedic sacrifices and things that aren't so much practiced today. But in verse 30, it kind of gives you a summary, starts the summary, that all these performers who know the meanings of sacrifice become cleansed of sinful reactions, and having tasted nectar of the results of sacrifice, they advance towards the supreme eternal abode. So ultimately, that's what you get out of all these different rituals, ultimately, if you're connected with Krishna. So we have to perform sacrifices, but we should do them carefully. And That's the essence of this. So then 34 to the end of the chapter is the conclusion. And what do you have to do if you want to get transcendental knowledge? You have to approach a guru in 34. And the results of accepting a guru is that you get real knowledge and you never fall again into illusion. And this a verse, atta, what is it? Atta, even if you are considered to be the most sinful of all sinners, when you are situated in the boat of transcendental knowledge, you'll be able to cross over the ocean of miseries. How can you be full of transcendental knowledge and be the most sinful of all sinners? But if you could, you would still, it's so powerful. And then 37, that the fire, as a fire ruins everything. Knowledge and Krishna consciousness, transcendental knowledge, gets rid of all reactions, sinful reactions. And transcendental knowledge is so sublime and pure in 38. And, we have to do some control of the senses in 39 to make advancement. Whereas in 40, the ignorant people, they don't know this and they fall down. So the verse 42 is this beautiful verse. Therefore, the doubts which have arisen in your heart out of ignorance should be slashed with the weapon of knowledge. Armed with yoga, O Bharata, stand and fight. So any questions, comments on that? Give me a second. So I haven't written the exam yet, but next week, I hope I should have written it by next week, and then we can go over more details about what to expect on the exam. We're just doing kind of a quick overview, but give me 2 minutes now, okay? Do these next 2 chapters. Okay. So now chapter 5 is a lot like chapter 3. Arjuna asks the same question. And he talks about how it's easier to perform karma yoga than jnana yoga. He says, Krishna, first you asked me to renounce work. Then you say work with devotion. Which one should I do? And say Krishna says they're both good, but the karma yoga or nishkam karma yoga or buddha yoga or bhakti yoga is so much easier. So then Krishna tells them how to, be in that mindset. Don't hate or desire the fruits of your actions. And how the one-step process of doing buddhi karma yoga or devotional service, you just do things for the pleasure of Krishna. The 2-step process is the sankhya. First you analyze the world, you put down the material world, and then you pick up the spiritual world. But it's a 1-step process. By just focusing on devotional service, you're successful. So yeah, just renouncing things is not enough. You should engage in bhakti. By the way, were there any questions at the end of the last chapter? I don't think I took any. Chapter 4.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Mm-hmm.
At the last verse where Krishna mentioned that with the knowledge, you can slash all the ignorance, and knowledge will be, of course, armed with yoga. So for us, being, common human beings, it's sometimes not difficult what to apply when. And
Yeah.
Of course, we're not in such, elevated platform. But again, then.
That's right. That's the challenge.
It's confusing sometimes. I think more practice or more understanding need.
Well, that takes
So-
wisdom. So usually, talking to a friend can help. Talking to a senior devotee can help. Because it takes wisdom is how to apply this knowledge that we're gaining in practical life. And that takes some wisdom. Yeah, you're right. It takes some wisdom.
So Prabhuji, I have an
So-
excellent question there. So Mataji, please go ahead if you have.
No worries, Mataji, you can go ahead. I was just asking, more and more association are maybe seeking seniors guidance. If sometimes you are falling in the situations, how to implement
Yeah.
Bhagavad Gita.
And sometimes
instructions.
sometimes talking to a friend can really be helpful also.
But Prabhu's friend means who is practicing and who is knowledgeable about this.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah.
A peer, an equal,
Thank you.
but
Yeah,
also
thank you.
talking to a senior. Yes.
So, yeah.
So Prabhuji, my question is, when the Lord talks about the weapon of knowledge, so he is including karma yoga, Sankhya yoga, and transcendental knowledge in this knowledge? Because this Prabhupada has not translated this as transcendental knowledge, just weapon of knowledge.
In 42,
Yes.
should be slashed with a weapon of knowledge. Yeah, well, this chapter was all about all the different knowledge that we learned in this chapter. But part of the knowledge we learned was about bhakti.
Yes.
Right. So that ultimately, as we know, and as we studied last week, ultimately that's the only thing that counts. Yogi nama pisarvesham makatena parat, the text 47 of the 6th chapter. We heard all about yoga, and then we heard yogi nam apisarva, but the highest yoga is bhakti. But here Krishna's not, this is just the beginning of the book, so he's not giving away the whole plot. Okay.
So Vineet Prabhu, you have a question?
Me?
No, Vineet, he's unmuted, so I was just checking. If not, I have.
No, no,
Okay.
Mataji.
All right. Well, I have one more question. The difference between the title, coming to chapter 5, between chapter 3 and chapter 5, Karma Yoga and Karma Sannyasa Yoga.
What's the difference?
Yeah, what is the difference?
Well, that's what we're going to study right now. It's just it's very similar, but it's taking it to the next level. Yeah, so that's what we're going to study right now. So we started already, and the first six verses talk about how karma yoga, nishkam karma yoga, but we could also call it bhakti, is much easier than the Gyani who tries to renounce everything, right? 4 and 5 talk about, there being some equally, but then 6 makes it clearly, merely renouncing all activities and not engaging in bhakti of the Lord cannot make one happy. But a thoughtful person engaged in devotional service can achieve the supreme without delay. So much easier, and that's more of an emphasis than we heard in the 3rd chapter. So how to do Nishkam Karma Yoga, which leads to bhakti. So be pure. And 7, act in devotion. Don't be entangled. And then how to do, the person in divine consciousness, we go through all these things in life, but they understand that it's not them. And then doing our work without attachment, giving the results to Krishna. It's like unaffected by sins, just as a lotus leaf is untouched by water. And again, how to do it: abandon attachment, act with body, mind, words, and center. Act for everything for purification. So that's section 12. And then the next one is, remember this somewhat complicated thing about who's the doer? So the soul, like in 14, the master of the city of his body does not create activities, does not induce people to act, nor does he create the fruits of action. All this is done by the modes of material nature. Let's see, we skipped 13. When the embodied living being controls his nature and mentally renounces all actions, he resides happily in the city of the 9 gates, neither working nor causing work to be done. Okay, so, but then in 15, Krishna's saying, well, I don't take on it's up to people how their independence. I don't assume people's karma. And then in 16, when you're enlightened, then everything becomes kind of clear. So, this was the remember the 3 doers, that the living entity is the doer number 1, that we, but that our bodily activities are carried out by doer number 2, the modes of material nature. And ultimately, these activities are allowed to happen by the super soul doer number 3. And so knowing those 3, and we gave the example of the child trying to lift a weight, and then the father comes behind him and lifts it for him. So who did it? Well, we said the child did it in the sense that the child had a desire to lift the weight, but the father did it because the child couldn't do it all by themselves. So those are the three doers. And then focusing on the super soul, which again is the higher level than what we heard in much of chapter 3. There's 17, when your mind, intelligence, faith, and refuge are all fixed in the supreme. And then the next verse about seeing the super soul within the Brahmin, the dog eater, the cow, the elephant, right? That's super soul realization. And being absorbed in sameness and equanimity, that's also super soul focus. And just not getting too worked up about this world, verse 20, rejoicing when something happens nice, lamenting when something happens badly. And then 21, not being attracted to the senses, sense objects. And then verse 22 is a very famous verse. An intelligent person does not take part in the source of misery, which are due to contact with the material senses. Such pleasures have a beginning and an end, and so the wise man does not delight in them. And then controlling the urges of the senses in 23. And then having this higher taste of the happiness that's within the heart by chanting, by hearing about Krishna, etc. It's 24. And getting beyond this whole world of dualities. I like this, I don't like that. This was nice prasadam, that wasn't so nice prasadam, this, that. That's all the trying to transcend or not be so worked up about the different dualities. That's helping to start focusing on the super soul. And then there's a little mini chapter 6 by 27 and 28 talking about yoga. And then the famous, maybe one of the most famous verses, the peace formula, Bhoktaram Yogata Sam Sarva Loka Maheshwaram, that a person in full consciousness, knowing me, 3 things: the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifice and austerities, that means we do everything for his pleasure; the supreme lord of all planets and demigods, he owns everything; and the benefactor and well-wisher of the living entities, he's our best friend. That way you get peace. So anything on chapter 5?
So Prabhuji, so in some of the chapter titles, the word sannyas comes, but that is not the actual ashram, am I right?
Sometimes I think it is I'd have to check, but sometimes I believe it is the ashram, and sometimes it's the idea of renunciation. As general, yes, because Prabhupada would talk about first of all, there's bogus sannyasis, and then he would say, for example, he called grihasta brahmacharis, grihastas who are very fixed in their Krishna consciousness. But I would have to check the Sanskrit, but I think you're right that often it's talking more generally about renunciation. And anyone, there's a verse in the Gita that says that real sannyas is not the social order, but it's the renunciation of sense gratification. Anything else? So the last
Krishna
chapter.
Prabhuji,
Yes.
coming to text 27-28, where it has all mentioned about how to control the senses, especially from the external sense objects, keeping eyes and vision concentrated, closed. All those things, I feel like it's all about the material or outside control. Though through this we can also control the mind, but it has not been mentioned anywhere. Like bhakti is also a part of it, but with doing all those things, the transcendentalist can get the liberation. That is my question, like where the bhakti gone from here. If all those yoga or pranayam kind of things, if you can become free from all the anxieties, fear, anger, and we can get the liberation. So where the role of bhakti?
That's coming up in future. First of all, we're going to hear more about hatha yoga in this chapter, for chapter 6. But everyone's so impatient. Krishna's only written we only got into the first 6 chapters.
Thank you so much.
But Prabhupada has put bhakti all over the purports from the beginning.
Yeah.
So bhakti is there.
So having said that, like thorough study is needed.
So these other things we can use, like we've talked about this before, I believe. You can use pranayama if it helps you do your bhakti. You can do some breathing exercises before chanting your japa or something like that. But they are meant to be kinkaras, or servants of bhakti, not that we think that they're important outside of bhakti.
Got it, Prabhu.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
No worries. Okay, so chapter 6. So again, we're hearing about yoga, but we're going to start by hearing about Nishkam Karma Yoga. Again, so chapter 1, verse 1 should sound pretty familiar now, that one who is unattached to the fruits of his work and who works as he is obligated is in the renounced order of life. Not he who, and he is a true mystic, not he who lights no fire and performs no duty. So that answers your question, Navadvip Mataji, that because sannyasis, usually they give up fire sacrifices. They give up mundane duties and things like that. Lights no fire kind of refers to brahmanas, right? But a real sannyas is not being attached to the fruits of work and working as is obligated. They are actually in the renounced sort of life, even if they may be not sannyasis per se. And then again in the next verse, real yogis renounce the desire for sense gratification. So that's nishkam. And then it makes a distinction here in verse 3 about neophytes or beginners in Ashtanga yoga and those who have been practicing it a long time. And then there's a discussion from verses 5 to 9 about the the earlier stage, right? So about the mind, that one should, deliver themselves in the mind and not be degraded. The mind is the friend of ours and is the enemy. And if you can't conquer your mind, you're in big trouble. And one who can, mind is the best friend. And the super soul, just like the goal of the yogi is to reach the super soul. If you've conquered your mind, the super soul is reached and you attain shanti, peace. And I really like verse 8. The person is said to be established in real self-realization is called the yogi or mystic when he is fully satisfied by virtue of acquired knowledge and realization. Can you imagine just being satisfied by knowledge and renunciation, and you don't want or need anything else? And then the person is still more advanced who sees everything neutrally. Okay, and then in now we hear about how to practice this yoga. So go to a secluded place, control your mind. In text 11 and 12, lay kusha grass on the ground, cover it with a deer skin to avoid the snakes. Don't make the seat too high. Don't make the seats too low. Should be in a sacred place. Hold your neck, body, and head in straight line. Subdue your mind, free from sex desire, etc. But then you also have to be a little careful. In 16, it says that, you have to, don't eat too much, don't eat too little. In 17, be regulated in your activities. And that your mind should be like a lamp in a windless place. And you need to do this with determination and not deviate at all from the path. And fix your mind. Don't let it wander in 26. Be controlled, 28. And what do you see? You get super soul realization, in 29. A true yogi observes me in all beings and also sees every being in me. They see this Lord everywhere. And 30 is a beautiful verse 1. For one who sees me everywhere and sees everything in me, I am never lost, nor is he ever lost to me. And 31 says that if you can do this, you can reach the super soul. Now, from 33 to 36, these 4 verses talk about how important it is to control the raging mind. Because Arjuna says, Krishna, this is not possible in 33. It's not practical. The mind is just restless, turbulent, obstinate, very, very difficult to control. And Krishna says it can be done by abhyasa and vairagya, by renunciation and practice. But if you can't control your mind in 36, you're in big trouble. And the next section from 37 to 45 is what happens to the unsuccessful yogi. And Arjuna asks that question. And isn't the person they give up material life and they're not successful in spiritual life. So what do they have? But Krishna says, no, it's not a problem. One who has done good, my friend, is never overcome by evil. So even a little devotional service will help. And what happens is after many years, you go to the heavenly planets, you enjoy, and then you come down into a wealthy family or a good family. And if you've practiced bhakti for a long time and unsuccessful, then you will take birth in a devotee family. And then when you take that birth, it revives your consciousness that you, to the extent that you develop your Krishna consciousness, you pick up from where you left off. And you see that people become automatically attracted to bhakti almost like that, because they're just picking up from their previous life. So then the last, last two verses really set the scene for the next 6 chapters. The yogi is greater than the mystic, greater than so the ascetic would be the person performing austerity is greater than the empiricist, that's the Gyani, greater than the fruitive worker, the Karmi, and therefore be a yogi. But then 47 is very important verse. It sets the scene for the next 6 chapters. And of all yogis, the one who with great faith, who always abides in me, thinks of me within himself and renders transcendental service to me, he is the most intimately united with me in yoga, and he is the highest of all. That is my opinion. So that is an overview of that. Next week, I will have, I have to make a note of that to get the exam ready so that I can give you more. And do you want to also start chapter 7 next week?
Yes, Prabhu, we can start chapter 7.
Okay. All right. Any questions, comments? I'm sorry, I've been a little tired today. I had to work late yesterday, and it's late for me. It's 9:30 at night. So sorry about that. But we will continue then next week with chapter 7, and we'll start the chapters on Bhakti, since you've all been waiting to hear about Krishna. Okay?
Prabhuji, will you give us an overview of the exam for this?
I'll give you an overview. I'm not going to tell you all the questions. I'll give you an overview.
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay?
Thanks, Prabhu.
Very well.